Go ahead, Dr. Liam. And again, guys, this is the final stage of our flight today. Fasten your seatbelt. We're getting ready to what? What is the term when you wanna what do they call it?
Rumble.
Touchdown. Get ready for touchdown in about 30 to 45 minutes.
Alrighty. So what we have to do now is destroy the Persian Empire. It's important to understand that Judah takes on a lot of its distinct Jewish political characteristics in the Persian period as a Persian satrapy of Judah. It's largely independent. It's ruled by its own elite, but that elite has ties to the Persian throne and to the Persian Empire, and it's all kind of like linked together in this larger system. And again, the Persians, wherever they go, they respect the local culture. So when Cambyses conquered Egypt, Cambyses went through the proper rituals to become a pharaoh, right, and to be acknowledged in that system. But the Macedonians then have to show up on the scene. Macedonia is an area in the north of where today Greece is, and the Macedonians in classical Greek period were sort of like the rustic country bumpkins that everyone just sort of like, yeah, you're kind of Greek, but you're also kind of like Hicks, you know? They unified politically in a way that the Greeks never did. So you look back at like the major Greek city-states and Thebes and Corinth and Athens and Sparta, they all freaking hated each other. They were constantly fighting. There was no unified Greece. But Macedon comes together much earlier because it's less developed, it's less urban, it doesn't have the longer term intellectual culture, but it does have it's part of the same basic language continuum. And it's that state that grows to great power that is used to unify most of Greece. Not all of it. You know, so
well,
like,
you just claimed you're Palestinian. I'm just saying.
Okay. Thank you for that. So, Palestine, in matter of fact.
Dash. sorry, Doctor.
Now we know where's Dish. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
Okay, so the Macedonians. So yeah, not all of it. So like Epirus and Sparta are still independent, but most of Greece is unified under Macedon. And then because of the history of the Greco-Persian wars and resentments and everything else, they decide, you know what? Let's attack the Persians now and push them back, especially since the Persian Empire had a number of important Greek areas under its control. One fun thing, if you care about like Greek history, culture, philosophy, Greek philosophy actually starts in Ionia, on what is say the west coast of Turkey, which, you know, is all part of the same Aegean cultural framework, but it's over there on the east that it's going. And so it's a very important part of the Greek cultural heartland, but it's under Persian imperial rule, and there's resentment of that. So the Macedonians launch an invasion, and Macedon moves in under Philip did a lot of the planning for it, but gets assassinated. So his son Alexander takes over, and Alexander charges in. The the victories of Alexander we don't need to get into the course of the conquest or whatever. Just note that he takes the whole area, goes down through the Levant, fights there, takes Egypt, uses the wealth of Egypt as a springboard, goes back up into the Persian Empire, topples its capital, charges into Central Asia, all the way to frickin' India. And then bro moves back to Babylon and drops dead. When he dies relatively young, he has an unborn heir. He's got a pregnant wife, but no living heir. And the generals initially think, well, we can kind of hold this shit together and maybe your heir can take power. So there's like a regency, but that's way too long to wait. And eventually the generals get tired of it and say, fuck this. And they fight each other and they tear it apart. Two of those are important for us, not the rest. Those two are the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. The Ptolemies, initially controlled some parts further north in Anatolia, whatever, but they end up centralizing and controlling Egypt. And Egypt, as well as the southern Levant. So Palestine was part of the Ptolemaic state initially. And under the Ptolemies, there's a lot of really interesting transformations that take place. What we have growing from this period, and all through what we're going to call the Hellenistic, so this time of Alexander and post-Alexander and all these, for the few hundred years of these like successor Didache states, as well as the early Roman period in the Eastern Mediterranean is all Hellenistic culturally. And Greek will become a common second language, a common language of commerce and intellectual culture. And significant numbers of people in the Levant, in Palestine, will start adopting elements of Greek culture. Some of them will move into wider parts of the Greek world. So there's a significant Jewish population living in, well, the only city that still kind of calls itself Alexandria in Egypt, right? Alexander named a shitload of cities after himself. You know, like, you are all Alexandria, all your base are belong to us. But there's one Alexandria left, and that Alexandria attracted a Palestinian population, a Jewish population to it. And with the tolerance and control, there's a distinction I want to make culturally between the way the Ptolemies built on their cultural inheritance and the Seleucids. And it might seem like a tangent, but it's really, really not. One key here is to note that in both cases, they need to hold on to elements of the civic cult, which was important in Greek identity. The Greeks themselves, all the different competing states, Corinth, Athens, whatever, you couldn't really change identities. You couldn't move to another city and become a citizen. The citizenship was based on your ancestors being from the polis, that all the different oikos that formed the polis, the original city-state, way back in the Archaic period. So they were really, really conservative in their sense of citizenship. Macedon is not that way at all. And the identities in the Hellenistic period are going to shift a bit, but it holds on to an element important to the original civic cults of the Greeks. You have to have some kind of unifying framework, something that holds people together. And both the Seleucids and the Ptolemies are going to build on that in different ways. For the Seleucids, they're blending a ton of Iranian ideas with Greek ideas. So it's a whole bunch of Persian hero gods and religious concepts and whatnot blend in with the Greek gods and religion, and they adopt elements of the prostration before the emperor that you had under the Achaemenids, and made that a part of their understanding of veneration of their emperor. If you've ever heard of Roman emperor worship, that ultimately is borrowed from the Seleucids, who adapted it by combining a Greek concept with a Persian concept. So that's one thing that's developing. And because their identity is much more strongly connected to that state cult and the figure of the ruler, it's going to be more intolerant. So we're building a much more intolerant system, even though it's syncretic, it's blending ideas together, but it has some very particulars it's going to have to impose upon people. So that's our Seleucids in the north. Hold on to them for a second. The Ptolemies are different. The Ptolemies build on a combination of Greek ideas with Egyptian ideas. And the Egyptians are in many ways, even by polytheistic standards, relatively tolerant of diversity in belief and whatnot, in practice. They, for example, didn't have a lot of the most, what I would personally consider a lot of the more horrific elements of Eastern Mediterranean cultures. The Greeks, for example, practiced female infanticide. The Egyptians did not, thought the Greeks were fucking insane for killing baby girls. In Egypt, women controlled significant parts of property still and could remarry with no stigma, so divorce is no big deal. You could totally divorce, remarry. You always still have your property. And in Greece, women were literally the property of their fathers and then their husbands and had no independent legal identity. There's some significant cultural differences. And the Ptolemaic dynasty that develops in Egypt blends elements of these. So it's more patriarchal. It has more elements of the Greek culture there, but it draws on the Egyptian culture as well. And there's some combined god ideas. So the Serapis cult is a combination of the Apis bull, sort of veneration in Egypt with some Greek concepts. There's some interesting developments there. But the tolerance is important. They're quite different from the Seleucids in this approach, in the way that they blended together the various influences. The fact that they initially controlled Palestine is important for us, and important in a couple of ways. One is the common version of the Bible that will be used for many centuries after this point, the Septuagint, is developed in this period. And it's a Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, because more and more people are learning Greek. They're living in other parts of these larger Greek empires. They stop speaking Hebrew and Aramaic. Hebrew also, incidentally, was effectively dead as a common spoken language a few centuries before this point. Aramaic had supplanted it, but Aramaic was close enough to Hebrew that you could still easily learn to read the scriptures in that language. It wouldn't be a huge chore to learn that. It's like if you speak, German, how easy is it to learn Dutch? They're very closely related Germanic languages, and and one is harder than the other, so it's easy to learn Dutch, right? But so Aramaic and Hebrew are close. Greek is fantastically different from Aramaic. So if you grow up as a Greek speaker, you can't read a fucking Torah anymore because it's in Hebrew and you don't speak a language remotely similar. So they translate it into the common Greek at the time. And when they do that, there are a lot of important decisions that have to be made. Anytime you translate from one language to another and one cultural context to another, ideas will shift. So I'll give you just a fun one that's just like, I don't know, I find this one particularly interesting or amusing. The word for a young woman, alma, doesn't imply whether she's a virgin or not. She could be married, unmarried, virgin, not virgin. It just means young woman. But they used the Greek word for a virgin, for a maiden, when they translated that line in. So then later Christians are going to look back to that and they're going to find a prophecy of Jesus. But it wasn't really the intent. They just used a word that made sense to them and that also kind of implied a virgin, right? Because young women generally are. If you're talking about like teenage girls, they're generally virgins. So they just used a closely related word. There's a lot of interesting shifts like that, but the fact that the Greek version is going to be used for many centuries after this is going to have a huge influence on the development of Christianity and later Islam, because it'll affect the way people read and understand a lot of these stories. Somebody mentioned Lut earlier, so like Lot and all that, like the whole Sodom and Gomorrah story. So I'm going to give you like a brief way of like seeing how concepts can shift culturally if your frameworks change, or like your influences change. The reason that Sodom and Gomorrah are targeted and God needs to destroy them is not explicitly stated in the Bible. It's not there. They're sinful. We know that they're sinful. But they don't list all the sins and say, this is why I have to destroy them. But in the Greek cultural context, pederasty is relatively widespread. People often think that the Greeks were tolerant of homosexuality. That's not strictly speaking true. They were okay with certain types of homoeroticism as long as it maintained a core concept fundamental to them. For the Greeks, sexuality was something, it was about power relations. There was a penetrator and a penetrated, penetratee, it was a power exchange. Sex was something one person did to another. And it was very, very male dominated. So women's sexuality doesn't really matter to them. It's like you are the penetrator and the power relations matter. So if you're a male being penetrated, you are put on the social status of a female, of a woman, right? You've lost social standing. If you're young, nobody cares. So if you're like 15, 16, up to your early 20s, nobody cared. You could do that. But once you're like past 25 or whatever, your beards come in, you're actually taking on your duties as a citizen in the Greek world, that can't happen anymore. So it's not the attraction. People didn't define themselves by what they're attracted to. They defined themselves by what they did. Like it's an active and passive sexuality. In the long run, this is very influential in Mediterranean cultures. The Romans adopt this. The Arabs adopt this. The Turks adopt this. Arab sexuality, and like you look at Arab sex manuals from the Middle Ages, that active, passive sexuality is very much the way that they understand it and they write about sexuality, which is one of the reasons that particular type of homosexuality survived all the way up to the 19th century in the Arab world. All through the Eastern Mediterranean, nobody cared. It didn't matter. Even though it was technically haram, just like it was a violation of Jewish law, it didn't really matter that much, because it became the common understanding of sexuality. There's the interpretation here, and that cultural context affects the way that Hellenized Jews read their own texts. So their opposition to pederasty, the fact that the Bible says, the Torah says, man should not lie with another man as with a woman. So it's saying, strictly speaking, dudes can't fuck dudes. And they don't have the long-term cultural history of pederasty yet for it to make sense. So in this early Hellenistic period, when they're reading the scriptures and they read the Sodom and Gomorrah story, they're like, oh shit, those cities were destroyed because they were gay. Like they were doing gay shit. And that is widely influential, and it affects the way Christians read it. It affects the way the story is understood all the way to the present. But it's distinctly a product of this Hellenistic period, because you have Hellenized Jews reading their own scriptures, and they see them a little differently. Your cultural context always changes things. This is why, again, we can open up Torah and read it today, and it absolutely sounds like a monotheistic text. But if you look at the same words and you put them back in their original context almost 3,000 years ago, no, it's not there. So it just depends upon the context, where you are at the time when you read the text. Even if the words don't change, the meaning can change. So the meaning of the Sodom and Gomorrah story shifted in this period. There's a lot of really fascinating things that affect the theology, the way that Judaism is understood in this period. Important philosophers like Philo of Alexandria, right, are writing in this period, and what he's doing is because he is a trained Neoplatonic philosopher. He's a Hellenistic philosopher and a Jew. So when he reads Tanakh as a Greek philosopher, it's going to affect the way that he understands it. And he's going to write about things in very different ways. It's actually, if you've ever heard when people look at like the Genesis story, like the world was all created in 6 days and then God rests and all that. If you've ever heard people saying, well, a day really means 1,000 years, you're actually leaning on Philo. Because those more allegorical understandings show up in that period. They start saying, well, this literally can't be true because in the Greek period, they knew a fuckload more about the world. The Greeks in this period, they know not only that the world is a sphere, but they know the size of it. Ptolemy had actually, a different Ptolemy, so like the Ptolemy the mathematician, not the ruler, but a different Ptolemy the mathematician, had actually calculated, you had calculations of the Earth's scale, that were down to within like 200 miles or shit. They really knew like their maths very well. So you can't read parts of the Bible anymore where it says, well, the sun is like moving over a flat earth and can be paused in the sky above it, because that understanding of the sun isn't tenable in a Greek world where you have more naturalistic understanding, you have more direct knowledge of the world. So you have to start reading the Bible more allegorically. You have to start introducing new ways of understanding the same words. Because at this point you can't change the words anymore. They're scriptural faiths. They're, the text is locked in, but we can shift the way that we understand the meaning of those words. So even though, like I said earlier, a lot of the core features of Judaism are really in place in that Second Temple period by the Persian period, a lot of interpretations still continue to shift as you're moving through the Hellenistic period because you're reading the material in a different way and it's making a bit more sense. So that's a really significant shift. So that takes us through the Ptolemaic rule of Palestine. Now I want to introduce some assholes from the north. The Seleucids are going to take control. Seleucus the first Nicator, the first ruler of the Seleucid dynasty, he was a general of Alexander, just like Ptolemy the first was. When he takes over the area and builds his own state, it initially stretches all the way from India to Syria. It's fucking huge. He gets the lion's share of Alexander's empire, but it starts breaking apart very, very quickly. A lot of Indians are like, dude, we'll give you a bunch of elephants if you get the fuck out of our land. Like, cool, I'll leave that behind. And then like, there's a bunch of Bactrians that break away and create a separate Greco-Bactrian kingdom. And then the Parthians rise in what is today Eastern Iran and, where like part of Southwest Central Asia is. It breaks away from it. It gets smaller and smaller and smaller. Eventually for a while it's like just Mesopotamia and then Syria. But while it still is strong enough like that, it seizes control of Palestine from the Ptolemies. And now the Seleucids rule. And the Seleucids again have developed that state cult in a way that venerates the emperor, which means that their understanding of a religion kind of matters, where for the Ptolemies, I don't give a shit that you have a different religion, bro, as long as you pay your taxes. They didn't care that Jews were Jews. But the Seleucids will care that Jews are Jews. So they're consciously oppressing them and affecting their religious practices because they're trying to insist, bro, you got to acknowledge our God. You got to acknowledge our emperor as a God. And they're like, bro, we're monotheists. We can't do that, bro. We have one God and it ain't you, bro. So there's tension, there's conflict. And eventually the Seleucids lose all patience. And under Antiochus, they seize control of Jerusalem, seize control of the temple in Jerusalem, rededicate it as a temple to Zeus, and sacrifice a pig on the altar in the Holy of Holies, the part of the temple that only the high priest could enter. It's a calculated insult, right? It's a giant fuck you to the Jewish people to seize their temple and make it a temple to Zeus and sacrifice a pig on the altar. So what did the Jews do? They revolted. Realistically, the Maccabean revolt that's going to create the Hasmonean dynasty is probably easily understood as the first actual war for religious freedom in human history, because it's specifically about the practice of their religion. Their monotheism is being crushed, and they are pissed, and they rise up in rebellion, and they actually manage to chase the Seleucids out, which is why I actually pointed to the fact that their empire is steadily shrinking. They have too much territory for the amount of manpower and wealth they have. They can't control it. And eventually decide, and no offense to anybody here, but you guys know that Palestine isn't the richest country in the world in terms of natural resources. It's not the best farmland in the world. So if they got to let go of some territory and fight for it, fuck it. We're going to leave that here. And they lose their fights there, and they don't come back because they want to still hold Mesopotamia. They want to hold their core areas in northern Syria and across where Iraq is, because that land is much richer for them. So they abandon Palestine, and that gives us the last independent Jewish state. The Hasmonean dynasty shows up from this point because of that revolt. And they establish this a temple monarchy. So you've got the high priesthood functioning out of the temple. You've got a monarch, like a Davidic monarchy, ruling again, and they're no longer a province. Again, they were a province in the Persian Empire, and then they were a province under the Ptolemies, and then the Seleucids, and now fuck it, they're a country, and they're an effective separate country. In this period, Judaism spreads more widely. This is a little known fact that in the Hasmonean period, they took inspiration from the earlier attempts to impose a particular vision. Remember, Josiah is the one who's like destroying the altars in the north and destroying like some of the Samaritan ways of worship and trying to centralize worship in Jerusalem. But a lot of it hasn't taken yet. There's still a lot of people practicing the religion in different ways. Most of them worship El in different ways. The religions are closely related, but they're still different, right? So what's happening in the Hasmonean period is they impose one vision, one way of being Jewish, and they forcibly convert tons of populations to that understanding of Second Temple Judaism. So it's still Second Temple Judaism, right? The one that developed in the Persian period in its fully fleshed form. It's that, but what it does is it spreads over a much wider area than it was originally concentrated in that part of the hill country, and now includes all of where today Palestine would be. And Palestine is taking on more and more of that identity. It's never complete. This is one of the things that people, again, miss about the ancient world is you never have a single ethnicity or religion controlling a whole area. There are still tons of Samaritans around. There are still tons of people practicing various forms of polytheism and minor different ways of worshiping El. But they do increase the number of people who have the one single standardized vision. And it's vitally important for us because it helps us to understand one of the ways that Judaism will survive. It becomes a larger faith. When there's more people with a single common vision and a single common set of texts, it's easier to resist the later assimilationist practices. So it becomes stronger in this period. Okay, so in that period, there's one quick point I want to make about some of the common factions that develop in this period, because it helps a little bit to understand not only the context of late Temple Judaism, but also early Christianity. There are different ways still of worshiping God and pursuing it. So I'm going to give you like some basic ways of looking at it. Here's one, the Sadducees. The Sadducee interpretation is that the temple is vitally important. The high priesthood and the rituals at the temple in Jerusalem is the be all end all. This is the only place sacrifice happened. This is important for us, and it's letter of the law, and it's how the high priest does shit. In contrast to that, the Pharisees invent the synagogue. Realistically, and this is one of the fun things about teaching early Christianity, is when you look at all the conflict between Jesus and the Pharisees that's present in the Gospels, it's kind of funny to realize that the actual perspectives that Jesus expresses in the New Testament kind of make him a Pharisee. He's preaching exactly the kind of decentralized worship that the Pharisees were doing. Because what the Pharisees said is, anytime enough of us get together, anytime you have a quorum, minyan, there's enough of us together, we can read Torah together, we can practice. We don't need to be at the temple in Jerusalem to honor God. We can build a separate place where we can get together and read Torah and pray and be Jews. So it's the same religion with the same basic ideals, but two very different ways of looking at it. The highly centralized temple priesthood version and the synagogue version. You see why that's important in the long run here too? The synagogue concept predates the destruction of the temple, and it's present, for a couple of centuries, spreading widely in the area before the destruction of the temple, under this Pharisaic movement. You also have, and this is again a fun place where you can point to the Greek context and later the Romans, the different cultural changes here. There's an Essene faction that says, you know what, these Greeks are bringing in booze. They're bringing in chariot races. I mean, chariot races in like the Hippodrome is kind of like Roman NASCAR. You're going there to watch wrecks and attacks and all that. So it's very popular sport. So you're drinking, you're going to the races, you're going to the theater, and a lot of theater productions by this point have lost the original religious context they had for the Greeks and are becoming more forms of entertainment. And some of it was pretty bawdy entertainment, pretty explicit. And then obviously there's the pederasty, the gay shit, they're like, all these influences, this is like a fallen culture, this isn't us, this is not how to be a good Jew. So they retreat further inland and they establish like desert communities. If anybody's ever heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls, you know exactly the kind of group I'm talking about. The Qumran community is an Essene community. There were a bunch of them like this, and there were people who said, we need to just get out of this world, check out, hide for a while, pray, worship, and wait for God to come back and fix this shit because we're living in a fucked up so there's three major factions with three very different interpretations of exactly the same religion. There are others. These are the three biggest ones. So again, it's a bigger picture than this, but I'm breaking it down like the way I do it in a lot of classes, right? Three major factions. All of those play a part in the drama that unfolds in the creation of Christianity, which again isn't going to be my topic here per se. But it's important to note that there's these conflicts in the Judaism that exists in the Second Temple period, that there's different ways of worshiping God, different ways of understanding your relationship to God. So now we got to throw the Romans into the picture. So deep breath. Here comes Rome, I don't know. I used to make fun like t-shirts for classes, like Goldie's talking about shirts all the time. I have like a few hundred shirts for like different lecture topics. I've gotten lazier since I moved into a smaller house and it's harder to find them. I used to be able to organize them and find the ones for different lectures. But like for the Romans, one of the shirts I made, it's like, it says, Ides quam volvam, and then it has a charioteer. It's like I'm translating the modern like phrase, that's how I roll into Latin, the Romans.
Liam, no one here speaks Latin except you.
Yeah, but the Romans are going to ride in, right? They're going to ride in and they're going to fuck shit up. So we got to put the Romans on the scene here, and the transformations here are going to be huge for what becomes the long-term progress of both Palestinians and Jews. Right? If you want to understand how we get to our modern identities and what'll be there for us later to quote unquote Arabize and change from there, the population that develops in the Roman period and into the Christian Roman period is vitally important. And the transformations in Judaism at this period are ultimately what help it survive to the present day, because generally speaking, Iron Age tribalistic faiths don't survive. They tend to shrink and shrink and shrink and shrink. Look how few Mandeans there are. Getting back to your Sabaean reference from Quran, the Mandeans are freaking tiny. Or look how far Zoroastrianism is falling, because you don't convert to Zoroastrianism. It's an ethnic faith. It's a tribal faith like Judaism is. So they shrink and shrink and shrink and shrink and shrink. Judaism has, relatively speaking, thrived. And it thrives because of some specific changes made in response to how the Romans fucked them. So, I know this has been a long day for y'all, but this is the last really important point here for taking our Palestinian population, our Jewish and Palestinian population out of, antiquity, really, out of the distant past and into a period that's getting closer to something we can recognize. Okay, so, Herod topples the Hasmonean dynasty. So it's literally a rebellion that topples an existing monarchy. So the last existing independent temple state is toppled from within by a dick who uses foreign troops. Herod makes a deal with the Romans. You provide me some troops, I will topple these people, and you can make me a client state. if anyone doesn't know what a client state is, it's not formally part of a larger country or empire, but it's sort of part of it. It's like their troops will be present there. It's kind of like what today we would call a protectorate. You know, like you got foreign troops present on the ground, you're paying taxes, to the empire, but you still have your own government internally. Kind of like Morocco under the French protectorate.
Like Saudi Arabia today.
What was that? Which one?
Today.
You could cut the word off. Which one today?
Like Saudi Arabia today to the US.
Sorry guys, I don't mean to interrupt.
Sort of.
Freedom, can you drop me? I have to go.
Oh. Right. Yeah, sort of. But yeah, I mean, much more like a classic protectorate where you're actually controlling certain aspects. Technically, Saudis don't pay taxes to us, right? But these guys will be paying taxes to Rome. So it's establishing a way in which you're part of the empire but not. Judea, the Latin form of Judah, as well as like Armenia for a while, and then like the Cimmerian Bosporus, like we're like the Crimean Peninsula today. Those three areas are like major Roman client states that aren't technically part of the empire, but they also sort of are. And that's under Herod. And Herod is a big time like suck up to the Romans. So if anybody has seen like the ruins of Caesarea on the coast, this is built as a Hellenistic city named for Augustus Caesar as a new port city.
I was just gonna say he names everything after Augustus. Basically, goes on to name everything after Augustus.
Yeah, he is fluffing Augustus hard, and it's a way of like saying, hey, if I kiss up to you enough, you'll give me some independence. Because he's kind of seeing the writing on the wall. They won't survive independently, and realistically, in the long term, he's kind of right. The only time Palestine has series of independent countries in it is when powerful empires don't exist. Remember the Bronze Age collapse? That's when our states like Israel and Judah and Ammon came into full existence because there was no major empires, or say also the Arameans, other peoples. But when there's major powers, they're going to conquer this area. That's just how empires work. Herod sees that the Hasmonean state in the long run is going to lose, and it's been losing ground to the Romans. So he just says, "Screw it! I'll cut a deal with them that makes us semi-independent, but acknowledges the political reality that the Romans now dominate this world." And that kind of lasts in his reign. One thing that's sort of important in the long run for him is that he essentially rebuilds the temple. It's interesting that from a cultural, historical, theological perspective, we only talk about first and second temple. Honestly, the third temple should be the one that's built here because he so extensively rebuilds the Persian era temple. Because again, this was built between Cyrus and Darius. It's old. It's been around there for centuries. But those walls, the big rectangular wall section in the east of the old city, that's Herodian. So when the raised platform that becomes the Haram al-Sharif comes into existence, that's actually Herodian. There was a large temple at the top of that hill before, and there's earlier works around it that will be buried underneath that today that go back to the, I guess you can call it like second temple, like, I don't know, 2.0 versus 2.1 or whatever, like version A, version B. There's parts that are buried under there. When people talk about archaeology under the Temple Mount, it really would only be going back to that period. What did the original second temple, system look like? But Herod extensively rebuilds this. And by filling it in and creating a larger raised platform, he's able to build a much more elaborate Hellenistic style temple on top. And that's the one that the Romans will destroy in the year 70. So sadly enough, it doesn't last for long. The second temple is actually there for centuries, but the version destroyed by the Romans isn't all that old when the Romans come along and take it out. It's less than it's like, 60, 70, 75, 80 years old, something like that. Not hugely old. But but it's a reconstruction. It's one of those places where, like, if you anybody know like the oldest commissioned U.S. naval vessel, the USS Constitution, is an early 19th century frigate. Most of that wood has been replaced at one point or another. There's literally an entire forest in the Midwest that the Navy maintains to get the right kind of wood to replace planks, because wood doesn't last forever in water. So it's one of those questions like, is it still the same ship or not? If you're replacing it incrementally, we always say it is. You're doing little bits of time, but it's still like the core structure. You can kind of think of it that way. So it's still the second temple, but it's changed and improved and built on. When Herod dies, there's fighting between his kids over who gets to rule. And the Romans lose patience with that. Instead of intervening to resolve the conflict, they just say, fuck all of y'all, this is now the province of Judea, and a straight up province of the Roman Empire, and we're going to appoint governors from now on. No more monarchy. So from this point on, the temple still exists, the high priesthood still exists, but the monarchy does not. So this is where you break that line. And this is in the year 6. So we're finally out of the BCE period. We're finally out of we're finally in the Common Era. In the year 6 CE, the Roman province of Judea replaces the client state of Judah or Judea. And it's going to stay a province for a long frickin' time with a few rebellions, but those rebellions the first Roman Jewish War or the Bar Kokhba revolt, technically, I'm not sure if that's going to be covered in your next week, but technically it's more in the Christian era, kind of, I'm going to talk about the first Roman Jewish War, but not the second. Well, it's sometimes you call it the second or the third. Depends on whether you count the Cyrenaic revolt as the second Roman Jewish War. But if you do, then it's the third. The Bar Kokhba revolt is actually a really important moment in the development of Judaism and the Jewish diaspora. But it's technically in the 2nd century, so up to Salah or anybody else, if you guys want to talk about it next week, and I won't, or I can tack it on at the very end here.
I think they're going to cover it. It's not me. I'm going to be covering the Islamic era, but there's another person who's going to be covering the Christian era.
Okay, so because it's technically Jewish, not Christian, but if somebody cover,
I know, but it fits basically in the beginning. You can shed light on it basically, and then if they repeat parts of it, it's not a problem.
Well, I mean, maybe I'll say one or two.
But that's the thing. That's the thing. It's better. And if they don't cover it next time, you can basically make up whenever you have a chance to.
Okay, cool.
Go ahead.
Oh, so people keep asking in the comments. So I'm just going to say again. Freedom said that this is TikTok records all this stuff. They're going to download it. And then I'll get a copy and I'll split the sections up and put them up so it doesn't look like this 6-7 hour thing. There's different pieces, and we'll put them all up on YouTube so you can get it. So yes, if you do want to hear the Natufian part or the Canaanite states, the different sections, it's all going to go up later. So cool. All right. So we've got the Judea as a province, right, from 6 CE. The Jews in this period are not happy. And they're not happy for the same basic reasons they weren't happy under the Seleucids. Because while the Romans are generally tolerant, there are still political problems. One key distinction between the way they ruled and the Seleucids is that the Romans, being a very conservative culture, they respect antiquity. And they recognize that Jews have been monotheists for a long time by now. They've been monotheists for centuries. So they say, dude, you don't have to honor the genius of the emperor. I mean, genius in its technical term, not smart dude. You don't have to honor the emperor as a god or whatever. You get a free pass. Christians won't. That'll be an important part in the development of Christianity. Because Christians, while they start as a sect of Judaism, the Romans recognize them as distinct enough to be a different religion. They say, fuck all of y'all, you got to worship the emperor too. But the Jews get a free pass and they don't have to. So what leads to the First Roman Jewish War is not religious persecution per se, although a lot of the Jews do hate the idea that they don't have a monarchy anymore. They do chafe under that, and they feel that some parts of them are being kind of shit on. But it's not really the religion that's the important part here. It's more the practical shit. Honestly, it starts as a tax revolt. They're just pissed off. And they rise up in rebellion because they don't want to be part of a big-ass empire that's conquering territory and having to pay taxes to it. So they rise up in 66 in a major uprising, and that will... it passes after a few years from the Vespasianos. So it goes from Vespasian to Titus, or Titus, right? You pass the torch because the war lasts a number of years, and The emperor dies. But under Titus, he takes power in 69. So in the year 70, Jerusalem is destroyed. And that's a big turning point here. They fucking torch it. The problem with the First Roman-Jewish War and this revolt here is that they didn't learn an important lesson that the Maccabees had done. When the Maccabees chased the Seleucids out of Jerusalem, they proceeded to conquer all the rest of the southern Levant. They took the rest of Palestine. They didn't stop. In the First Roman-Jewish War, the rebels seized control of Jerusalem and then started fighting each other over what to build out of that. Where would they go next? They couldn't decide. They couldn't agree. So they stayed in that general area around Jerusalem, and that gave the Romans time to build a big-ass army and march into the area. And this is a time when Rome is still strong enough that if it wants it, it's going to take it. So it takes a few years to move troops, that far, but they move troops to the area and they freaking crush it. They surround Jerusalem. They tell people anybody who tries to escape will be crucified on the spot. And they eventually break down the will. And the people inside don't help matters by sometimes burning their own food supplies and stupid shit like that. Trying to encourage people to fight harder. That was dumb. But the siege is eventually broken. The Romans get in and they massacre people. I keep forgetting them on TikTok. And in the aftermath of this, things are going to get a lot more problematic for Jews. Now, it doesn't get to a part that we need to talk about a little bit later with, so I'm going to very briefly touch on the Bar Kokhba, and I need to get to Talmud, because I know there was a couple of interesting questions about where Talmud comes from, and it's very closely connected to this point here. The defeat doesn't really end the desire to fight back. And Jews in different places keep rising up in rebellion. The second major conflict is actually over in what is today eastern Libya. And there's a major revolt among Jews there, and that gets crushed. And then in the early 2nd century, I'm terrible with years sometimes, 126, somewhere around there, the Bar Kokhba revolt breaks out. And in that one, they're a little bit more successful. They push them out farther, and they live long enough to actually even start minting their own coins. So they're briefly independent again, but not long enough to rebuild the temple. It only lasts about 3 years. Again, the Romans are still strong enough. They send in an army. They crush it. Bar Kokhba is flayed alive, I think. It's really horrific. They put this down with unbelievable brutality. And this affects the Palestinian population as a whole, because portions of that population are driven out. They're terrified. They need to flee. A whole bunch of people who want to maintain their fidelity to Judaism just get the hell out, because Jews are fine in the Roman Empire as a whole. As long as they're not concentrated, there won't be a rebellion, so they won't have problems with the Romans. And again, generally speaking, the Romans don't care if you practice Judaism. So they scatter to other parts of the empire. They also scatter further east and head out that way. Some of them head further south and end up in Arabia. And where you guys know that that's part of the early Islamic stories. There's a bunch of Jewish tribes living down in Arabia, down in Medina and whatnot. So Jews scattered widely in this period because the Romans take out so many people. They are horrific in their brutality in putting this down. They are done. And what they do in this period is they rebuild Jerusalem as Aelia Capitolina. They bar Jews from being present in the city, and that stays the case in the Hellenistic, the still Hellenic pagans, but as well as the early Christian period. The Christian Empire later still, they keep Jews away from it. Jews cannot go in, they can't get into it, and the Temple Mount is literally used as a trash bin. They just throw their garbage up there. There's a lot of conscious disrespect. But they think by keeping Jews away from Jerusalem, they won't have a way to rally around a central point, like something in terms of their identity to build for and aim for. So they'll stop revolting. They'll eventually give up, and they kind of do. There are movements over the succeeding centuries for different messianic movements, attempts at revival over and over and over again. There are people declared messiahs that, Bar Kokhba was called a messiah, but they all fail miserably. None of them get close to restoring anything at all. The only time that you even get kind of close is under the short-lived reign of the Emperor Julian, sometimes called Julian the Apostate. He's raised as an Arian Christian, but rejects it when he takes power and restores the Hellenic faith. And he actually gave a shitload of money to the Jews to rebuild their temple. But his reign lasted 2.5 years. He got killed in a fight with the Iranians, and that was rescinded. So it never actually came to pass. So they never actually got access to it again. So it stays then a Christian city until the Arab conquest, when Jews are finally allowed to return to it. But the Jews outside of it, they have to find a way to understand their religion now. They've lost the state. The temple monarchy. Without a Davidic monarchy and a temple priesthood, and since you've centralized so much worship at Jerusalem, this is the only place that you can sacrifice to forgive sins. This is where God wants to hear that shit. If you can't sacrifice there anymore, what do you do? So they have to reinterpret things. So you get a lot of really clever work with the Bible. So they'll reinterpret a passage in Hosea to say that particular types of prayers can take the place of sacrifice and we can still get forgiveness. And you find ways to continue to practice even though you've lost some vital elements of it. People talk about 10 commandments, but there's actually in the Jewish understanding 613 present in Torah. But 2/3 of them cannot be observed because you don't have a temple or a monarchy. So only about 1/3 of them are still active. So they get really, really careful about preserving those remaining ones. So a lot of interesting practices in modern Judaism, like separating meat and dairy. So there's no such thing as a kosher cheeseburger. Comes from a particular line in Torah that people didn't understand anymore. You shouldn't stew a calf in its mother's milk. Well, we don't know precisely what this meant anymore, but it does seem to mix meat and dairy. We don't want to accidentally offend God, so we'll make sure we can't possibly offend God. The rabbinic concept is building walls around Torah to avoid any possible offense. Because the idea here is Judaism is a religion of redemption. Just like Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, there's only a handful of them in the world, really. But it's vitally important that they get redeemed in the eyes of God. And the way to do this is to hold to what's left of Torah as best as you can, and to show that you're worthy of redemption and for God to send Hamashiach to change things. And that's where Talmud comes in. People have been in these pali spaces, I'm sorry to say, badly been misusing Talmud in the same way that asshole religious Zionists have been misusing Talmud. Because if you pull out specific parts of it, you can twist it to mean almost anything, because Talmud isn't a set document. It's not scripture. It's a collection of arguments. It's a collection of interpretations. It's like if this particular scholar was in a bad mood one day and said like, unalive everybody, and then the next day he's like, I love everybody. Both statements are in there. They saved every possible thing they can get, every scrap, every piece of knowledge, every bit of interpretation of Torah they could find. They compiled it all. It's sort of like hadith in a sense, because hadith collect everything. You guys know, I don't know if Muslims at least would know, like that's why the isnad are very important.
Because I was going to say it's more like tafsir. It's more like tafsir. It's like commentary.
Well, yeah, that too. It has elements of both, because there's commentary and commentary on the commentary and criticisms. But it's similar to hadith in the sense of being a compilation of everything, not just the good stuff. So, while we can say this one very likely Muhammad said, because it's just like, I don't know, Abu Bakr said, Muhammad said, blah. It's like one source. And okay, that's probably going to be good. But if it's like Bob said to Mary, said to Joe, said to Fred that Muhammad said blah, and then you can go back and say, well, Fred was already dead and Joe lived in a different country. This chain of transmission suggests we shouldn't take this seriously. It's similar in the sense that you still keep everything. The hadith keep everything, even the bad shit. So does Talmud. So Talmud has a ton of crazy shit in it. But it's also, it's also, and like the commentaries there too, because that's literally what it is. It's commentaries on Torah and commentaries on how to practice and how to interpret things, what to do. And it's literally everything they could find from all the sages. So it's stuff from the last couple of centuries before the Common Era and the first couple of centuries of the Common Era. It's a long period of time where they collected every scrap of material they could find and pulled it all together. So it cannot be read linearly. It cannot be read as saying, this is true, Jews believe this. Jewish education traditionally is like two people sitting across from each other reading a passage of this in Aramaic and then arguing about it. It's where you get a lot of the cultural tropes, the little stereotypes that I joke with other Jews about, like, two Jews, three opinions. We don't agree with each other on anything. Like, we're always like, fuck you, and in some level you can see that as a fundamental feature of Judaism. You can see that in the way we take the word Yisrael to mean, to wrestle with God, to struggle with God, or the fact that Jews are given some rules and then constantly fuck up. And then God punishes you and you're like, I'm sorry. You're like, okay, bro, I forgive you. Here's another chance. And you fuck up again. So there's this constant sense where we're like flipping God off and doing our own thing. This conflict is fundamental to understanding what Talmud is. That it's all this possible interpretation of Torah, but it completely disagrees with itself from beginning to end. You can't find a consistent thread through it.
Liam, if I was saying this, I would have been accused of anti-Semitism.
Well, no, because honestly, this is one of the things I find most beautiful about Judaism. To me, as far as I'm concerned, everything I'm saying is a compliment, and it's one of the reasons I'm attracted to Judaism.
Listen. Like, if I literally believe me, man, if anybody but Jews said that, they would have been called anti-Semites.
Right, exactly. Because again, a lot of people don't really know enough about the structure of their own religion, and people don't tend to understand each other's religions, So it kind of sounds like I'm shitting on Judaism. I'm not. I'm literally just telling you how Jews view it historically. Like we know it's a giant clusterfuck of competing understandings. And Jewish communities have always argued with each other. They've always diverged. They've always disagreed. This is one of the reasons that Judaism and Islam have a vital thing in common. They're both orthopraxic. The way you practice Judaism, what you do, if you commit to living a Jewish life, you're a good Jew. And it ultimately doesn't matter what you believe or how you interpret things, which is why also again in Islam, look at how many different schools of interpretation there are for Sharia, right? And there's wild disagreements between them. The way you interpret the text varies tremendously within Judaism, and we've never agreed with each other on any of this shit. So the way a lot of the religious Zionist rabbis pulling pieces out of Talmud today to talk about how you should just totally let Palestinians be unalived or lie bleeding in the streets or whatever, they're picking up the kinds of things that most Jewish communities for most of our existence have said, that's fucked up, bro, don't do that. Like, these are lessons of what not to do. It's sort of similar to the way that if you look back at like the Hellenic faith, a lot of the stories about Zeus are literally saying, don't be like Zeus. Not everything compiled in a religion is good. You save a lot of bad shit and bad examples, right? They're pulling the worst elements out and saying this is our authentic Judaism. And in doing so, they're shitting all over me and most Jews. And when Palestinians do the same thing and they point to those same passages, especially, and I'll say this to the Muslims in the audience, if you don't like the way people pull out terrible hadiths and use them to misinterpret them to say that like we should unalive all the Jews or something, if you're deploying Talmud that way, you're doing the same basic thing. It's honestly fucked up. It's just not the way this is supposed to be read. Talmud does not have a single uniform interpretation. It's the same kind of racist shit when people misuse Sharia and misuse hadiths and whatnot here. So please understand that Talmud is a giant collection of arguments and commentaries and conflicting commentaries that have wildly different views of exactly the same thing. But having those arguments, having them present and being able to talk about them and read them in these languages, that has given Jews a common identity that's held them together in diaspora. Because being scattered around the world, you always partially assimilate. You become like your neighbors. You adopt their languages, you adopt elements of their culture, but you hold to certain elements of your religion. You have Torah and you have Talmud and you have ways of living your life. And those have given a common identity to Jews in exile, in Goles, in permanent exile. Judaism became, in the Roman period, a religion of permanent exile. And Talmud was a way to still be Jewish without a religious state, a temple monarchy, or the rest of that crap. It's at the end of the day, it's why we don't need a third fucking temple, to still be Jewish. It's not necessary. The religion clearly has survived and thrived. And you can see that in some of the diversity too, because people have consistently converted to Judaism for the last 2,000 years. It's why people look different in every Jewish community around the world. It became a distinct ethno-religion, but not one that has to create ethno-states. There is a distinction there. And the last thing I'll say that's fundamental to our understanding in the contemporary period here is you have to understand that Judaism does have a sense of nationhood. It does have an ethnic identity, but it's one that was consciously developed in this Roman period without a state. So it's a way of organizing yourself and having a common identity, a political identity that links you together with all other Jews in a common ethnic understanding that doesn't have to have physical power in the world to be Jewish. That doesn't mean it has to be in absence of it. That's a whole different argument there too. But I'm saying it doesn't need it. It's not necessary. And there are a lot of people who misuse that shit today too in different ways. So yeah, please understand at least that while we've talked a lot about the evolution of the religion, one thing I've tried to show is that from the Canaanite period on to the present, not only do you have a lot of threads being left down that the Palestinians will build on, because a lot of those Samaritans and Jews in the Roman period, they converted to Christianity and stayed in the area. And then later, some of them converted to Islam, and they're still present on the land. This is why, genetically speaking, a lot of Mizrahi Jews and Samaritans are, 60 to 80% genetically the same as Palestinians. They're the same fucking people at the end of the day. We've just diverged. And all the Jews that scattered to farther places, whether you're talking about Poland or Ethiopia, they still have those Levantine genetic markers, just less of them because there's more intermarriage and more blending in. But you're still connected to that original homeland and that original connection. But people actually never left. They just changed culturally and linguistically. They adopted new religions. They adopted new identities. But it consistently builds layer by layer on shit that goes back, if you remember the first part of this, to the frickin' Stone Age. People have always been the same, but they've also always changed. So don't, again, sometimes people misuse this also in a Palestinian context, say, we're Canaanites and nothing has ever really changed. That's bullshit too. But there is descent. There is a connection. It does build incrementally over long periods of time, and cultures simply evolve. There's a physical connection that Palestinians have to the land, but also that all Jews have to the land. Judaism simply found a way to survive in exile by holding on to a specific, set of rituals, things that gave them a sense of identity outside of the land, while instead the Palestinians abandoned those. Most of them abandoned the Samaritan practices and the Jewish practices, because again, a lot of Palestinians are literally descended from Jews. Instead, they found different ways to survive. They adopted a different religious framework. They became Christian, and then Muslim, and then adopted Arabic. But changes in culture on top of that doesn't mean you weren't still there. This is one of the reasons I don't like when people say that, Jews and Palestinians are like cousins. No, we're literally we're siblings. We're the same freaking people. It just starts from that same common origin. We just went in different directions to survive. In the context of big empires that were angry, we found different ways to survive going forward. The Palestinian approach was to blend in and to assimilate more to the imperial frameworks, to become Christian or whatever, right? To adopt those later imperial languages. And the Jewish approach was to flee as far as possible and hold on to a tight set of rituals that at least distinguished you a little bit from your neighbors. And neither of them one's not better than the other. They're just different. They're both ways of surviving terrible circumstances. So, yeah. Okay, I guess, yeah, that's that. I think that takes us, I promise to take you into the Roman period, and that's what we've done.
Dr. Liam, don't forget to drink some water. They're saying in the chat.
Don't dehydrate yourself.
Yeah, we really appreciate you. You've been here for, let me see, 7 hours. Have you eaten?
Shoot.
Yes, have you eaten?
When this is done, I'm gonna go put on some shitty TV and eat some pizza and hang out,
Okay, that's perfect. So, thank you everyone for coming. Does anyone? Okay. Okay, we have a Zayo who has a question. Do you want to answer that? You want me to bring him up?
Again, after each period, inevitably there's questions. I'll field questions and then we're done. Yeah, so sure.
Yeah.
As long as it's on topic.
You can drop me.
Okay, so Zach, you just came in.
Don't ask me about the Arab period.
Yes, okay, Zach, before I bring you up, just listen, okay? We have a specific topic. Ancient history, Stone Age to the Romans. If your questions specifically about this period, say yes, it's about this period. If not, you can stay there until we get to the period wherever you have your questions. Okay, because I just saw him, he just walked in. Everyone else, if you have any questions, I know that you have been here for a very long time, so you heard everything that he said, or Dr. Liam discussed. So,
And I have a couple of
that topic.
questions, and I'll
Okay.
start with this, and then
No, Salah, I know that when you have a conversation with Dr. Liam, it's very informative and very intellectual. So let's get Zach out of the way.
Okay.
Okay. And then we can go to your questions. Fama, I'm going to drop you upon our agreement.
Yeah, absolutely.
I
I
will
told
bring
you
you right back up after. Please request I will bring you after Zach. Oh my God.
Oh, if you give me like 30 seconds, I'm gonna go use the restroom for a second because
Go ahead.
No, take
Go
your
ahead.
time. Take your time. That's fine. Take your time.
It's totally fine. Take your time.
No problem.
So gather up your questions. I'll be right back.
Listen, Abdullah, thank you so much. You're amazing. Zach, on topic and very respectful, please, okay?
On topic and as respectful as I can possibly be.
No. Very respectful.
Very respectful. I think anyone who has heard me speak knows that I'm pretty respectful. So is the idea that the history from
The person who's going, okay, Zach, the person who's going to answer your question is not here. We're all listeners. We're not
I was
even
talking to you. I was talking to you.
Okay, that's fine. Go
Oh.
on. What question have you got?
What is it?
No, I was just going to say, so is the idea that the actual archaeological history from the Stone Age to the Roman era suggests that there is a Palestinian claim to the land?
Yes.
Okay. Cool. Let's chat about it.
So you did not hear everything or anything that he said.
No,
You just saw the.
I mean, we're here for 7 hours.
I caught the last part.
How long was the last part?
I don't know, probably 3 or 4 minutes.
Oh my God.
No, he's not coming to do. He just literally.
You did not say that. Just say that. You did not just say.
I heard his discussion. I heard
Liam.
I heard
Liam.
Okay, that's easy. No one can make claim to land from ancient fucking history. It's incoherent. It's stupid. Like so England should be part of Italy today. That's the kind of nonsense you're getting here. No, Palestinians don't have claim to land over Jews. Jews don't have claim to land over Palestinians. No one does. You can't do that shit. It's
great.
just
Hold on. So that's amazing. So then how do you claim land then?
No, you don't.
So
No one goes and says your house is mine because I have a book.
No, nobody did that. Nobody did that.
That's literally
100% false. And
okay, well, all the Zionists disagree with you. Like they all fucking do. Like they literally every one of them.
Which ones? Ben Gurion. Which ones are we talking about?
Okay, so Ben Gurion, sure.
Okay, sure.
You know, Herzl, Pinsker, they all fucking do.
What did they say?
They pointed to the origins on the land and a historical link to it and said, we need self-determination and our own state.
Okay,
and
but you acknowledge that
Zach, when I said, okay guys, give me 1 second. When I say be very respectful, means you have the chance to finish your sentence. Dr. Liam has a chance to finish his sentence. You do not cut him off. Okay?
They use the fucking Bible. Over and over again.
Hold on.
Again, most guys are atheists, but they still used that connection to say, I can expel other people from it because it's originally mine. Otherwise, why not
wait a
move
second.
aside?
Liam, what expulsion are you talking about that the Zionists were speaking about? Because every piece of Jewish land that was owned in 1948 was bought.
That's 6%.
That's a complete lie.
6%. They bought.
And a complete lie.
So your
6% of, by the way, just to be clear how that number works out, 6% of the British Mandate of Palestine, which was Jordan and Israel.
No.
That's what the British Mandate of Palestine.
The 6% is without Jordan, and if you look at it with the UN partition,
even if it's 6%, then it mostly included the Negev, which is ridiculous. Nobody lived there. The land.
You're talking,
guys.
So yes,
the amount of land. Wait. Sorry, Liam.
But it's still 6%.
The amount of land, the amount of actual land that humans live on in the United States of America is very small relative to the total land mass that you'd be talking about if you were talking about some sort of a treaty of American land.
Zach, I'll answer your questions if you can shut the fuck up after you ask one. I'm not going to sit here and have you just cut me off to lie to my fucking face. If you want to ask a question, let me answer it, and then you can lie about something else. But don't pull this shit with me.
I'm sure. Okay. What's the question that you think you're answering?
You said it doesn't matter that there's less of it. Do we say that Wyoming isn't part of the U.S. and doesn't count into the total percentage of the land? There's 500,000 people in fucking Wyoming. It's mostly empty. It's still part of the United States. The Negev is part of Palestine. You lied when you attached Jordan to it. It's 6% from the Jordan to the Mediterranean. 6% of that. If you want to talk about it being legally purchased, you get 6% of that land. And sure, it's some nice prime land in the eastern Galilee and in the north along there and along the coast there, but it's also completely intermingled with other people because there's no contiguous chunks of land. This is why all of the Zionist writings from the late 19th century all the way on always involved discussions of expulsion. They all did.
Zach, you were warned that if you cut him one more time, you're going to be dropped. We had 7 hours of peaceful conversation. 7 hours. And you come here in 2 minutes and you ruin that? No. Not today. Not here. Go away.
Shukran.
Sorry, Zach. Now I understand why 2 Jews, 3 opinions.
Yes! Exactly. And in proper Jewish fashion, they're based on interpretations of texts.
Yes.
He did different texts than I do.
And Liam, but also one something very important. He just threw a lie that saying that all the land that Jews had or whatever in 1948 was bought. That's literally a complete lie because half of that was confiscated by the British Mandate and handed over to the JNF, the Jewish National Fund.
This is
confiscated.
For the future discussion, guys.
And this is from the British Encyclopedia. It's not there.
Salah, we don't want to get into this because we do want to keep Dr. Liam even longer than that. Right. The man is starving. I feel that he's starving. He needs to go eat. Okay. Did you order the pizza or not?
Well, no, it's in the other room. It's in the refrigerator. I'm just going to heat something up from yesterday. But the short.
Okay, that's good. But the last thing I want to say to the person in the comments who wants me to show my face is for my husband to enjoy and for you to wonder about.
The short answer to Salah is what they usually mean. What they're doing is they're reinterpreting the line about it legally. 6% was legally owned by Jews. You know, at the time when you get by the time
he said bought. He said bought.
I know, exactly, and that's a twisting of it.
Yes.
But it's still it comes from a source that does say legally, and then they just misread it. And this is how disagreements start because words can be read in different ways. And when someone says 6% is legally owned, it's pretty easy to assume, oh, that must be bought, and then they don't bother to do their homework. They just run with that. This is how humans work. always read the language in a way that suits our own understanding of things.
Okay. Now back to the topic, because we jumped 1,000 years or 2,000 years from the end of your subject.
Yeah.
That's after him claiming that the question is on topic.
Yeah, there's the claim part. I mean, that one question was on topic, and no one has claim. Jews don't have claim to land what somebody else had. No one can do that. It's just not how the world is supposed to work.
Yeah, it's basically because Jews never were the majority of everybody on the land, on history, plus the rest of the people, all the nations, every single nation lived with the different nations together in the same place. And that's why no one single population had a single claim for the land over everybody if we want to take history. But if we want to take the consistency of the living on the land for the last 1,500 years, you will see that the Palestinians stayed there for the last 1,500 years constantly under all the different empires. And that's why I don't think I think neither the genetic nor the historic discussion is relative to who has the right to be on the land. Now, my question is, do we have any non-mobile evidence of the either the first or the second temples?
Do we have any
non-mobile founds? Non-mobile founds.
I'm not understanding. Do we have any what?
Non-mobile founds, like things that cannot be moved, things that are fixed on the ground from the first or the second temples.
What would that include? What can't be moved?
Include infrastructure, like a pool. Sorry?
Anything can be moved. You can. I mean, like the Knott's Berry Farm amusement park in Southern California has a ghost town of buildings brought from tons of ghost towns around the country. They literally moved the buildings and put it back the way it looks. You can move anything.
So no, I mean anything but coins and things like that, like stones, like
sure. The entire lower part of the wall that stretches around the Haram al-Sharif. All of that, those stones.
That's Herodian. That's Herodian.
Yeah, exactly. Herodian. But that's the second temple. It's modifications to the second temple that was there.
But it's 600 years difference.
Well, no, it's still again. Think about my USS Constitution thing. It's the same building. They're modifications to the same building, and we have evidence that the building existed because we literally have the Persian documents. This is why when people are only looking at Bible, they miss tons and tons of shit. We literally have Persian documents discussing the construction of the Second Temple. Oh, it went quiet again. Did you mute yourself?
Yeah. No.
Okay.
I'm just thinking because we have identical stones built by Herod the Great in different places, like in Hebron, for example, in Mamre. In Mamre, they're identical. They're not related to the temple, and they are a different temple. Why this? Why it is a temple, but it's not the Jewish temple. No, it was a polygamy temple.
But it's again not a temple, capital T, in the sense of like what we've been talking about. So
so why would that specifically be related to the temple?
Because we know the location of the temple, and we have documents about its construction. And again, there's tons of finds that have been dug up from the ground underneath it. So if you're talking about movable stuff, then you'd have to assume that somebody has either fabricated the dig itself or somehow dug in and buried it, but completely concealed that it wasn't naturally buried and then dug things out. I mean, we literally have a seal, like for letters for Isaiah. You know, I mean, we have Hezekiah's seal. And there's tons and tons of stuff that go back to that period that place people on the ground using the written forms that existed at the time. And we have documents from more than one culture talking about its location. So it wouldn't make sense that it was physically in a different spot. Especially since, again, we have traditions that existed in tons of the other faiths. Islam itself says that's the location for it. That's why it was Al-Aqsa. It was because the first direction of prayer for Muslims was toward Jerusalem, north. Because Muhammad was originally pitching himself as a prophet in the Hebrew tradition, and when the Jews are like, bro, you're not one of our prophets, he's like, okay, cool, and it slowly Arabized. It changed its direction. But they initially pointed north, and that's why the night journey has him tying the Buraq at the wall and going up there and ascending from there, because that's a holy site connected to God. It's literally from the understanding of the location of the temple being up there. So it wouldn't make sense that it would be a completely different location. I mean, anything is possible. It just verges on the completely absurd for it to be a different location.
Another question. What is your comment on the claim that the Romans has expelled the Jews from Palestine?
Well, by their own records, they did, but not all of them. I mean, there were tons of
exactly.
behind.
So, did they take the Romans of Palestine or the Romans of Jerusalem?
There were expulsions and atrocities in other parts of the country. It wasn't only in Jerusalem. And again, there's two distinct wars where this happened. Not only the first Roman Jewish war, but also in the Bar Kokhba revolt, even more people were chased out then. There were large numbers that were enslaved and hauled off in captivity as slaves. There were others that chose to flee to get the hell away from the Romans in order to preserve their identity. Others were unalived in large numbers, but there were still people left behind. But most practitioners of Judaism wouldn't have stayed because in the aftermath of those conflicts, the Romans outlawed Judaism. They made it literally illegal to practice Judaism in that region. So if you wanted to practice Judaism, it made more sense to move to Alexandria, where it was still legal to do so. But
they still practiced Judaism during the Christian and the Muslim era.
Later, but not initially. They rescinded those rules, but in the aftermath of the revolts, they banned Judaism. They later took that back. So yeah, your statement is accurate, just not for the time period we're talking about, where we're mentioning like expulsions and flights into diaspora. They barred the actual practice of Judaism in that region for a while, and then later took it away when they realized, well, it's not necessary anymore because they're not revolting, the population went down, it's no big deal. They backed off. It's similar to like when you look at persecution of Christians. It varies tremendously over time and place. There are places where individual Roman governors went full-on apeshit against Christians, and then times when the emperor said, dude, back the hell off and leave them alone, and they stopped. And then times when the emperors piled on and went after them. So Christianity was illegal at times and not illegal at times. The same situation is true for Judaism here.
What was the period Judaism was, like, from what year to what year it was banned?
I don't remember the year, but there's a significant period that follows the Bar Kokhba revolt. So it's a significant section of the early 2nd century. And there were shorter term persecutions in the wake of the first one. But in the second one, this is one of the reasons they took over the temple and the city, why it became Aliyah Capitoline. It was consciously to break the tie to the land, to break their link there. So one of the ways that you do that is not only rename it, take it over, and bar them from one city, but you bar practice of the faith. And this encouraged, so it's less a matter of people being forcibly expelled and more a matter of saying, if you want to preserve your identity, you have to leave. And people did. They picked up and moved somewhere else. The community in Mesopotamia was still going strong, so some of them went to Iraq, others went to Alexandria, others scattered across the empire into different locations, because if they were in a small minority community, the Romans didn't give a shit if they practiced Judaism. But in its heartland, in Palestine, for a number of years, it was banned. The Jerusalem prohibitions lasted much longer. So that's a distinct issue from it. prohibition of actual Jewish practice in Jerusalem lasted centuries, but the practice of Judaism, they later, relaxed the controls over the rest of it because it wasn't necessary. It's one of those like, there are still cities where it's illegal to spit on the sidewalk, but who the hell's going to enforce it? It's pointless because most Jews that wanted to practice Judaism picked up and left, and other Jews who stayed, they just became Christian or whatever. They just gave up the practice of it, so it wasn't necessary to care.
Okay, just to let you catch a breath, guys, please, everyone, Mrs. Abdullah, Mrs. Abdullah in the comments, everyone. Thank you so much, Mrs. Abdullah. She's like the number one gifter today. She's very generous. Yeah. So everyone, Mrs. Abdullah in the comments. Okay, go ahead, guys.
Hi,
I'm
Professor
typing.
Liam. Oh,
I had to W.
Can you guys hear me?
Go ahead.
We can.
Okay, so hi, Professor Liam. Thanks for giving us this long educational live and being patient with us. My question is for you. I have two questions. One is for the prime ministers of Israel that either directly come from Eastern Europe or removed by one generation. These prime ministers are, I believe, they're Khazar colonial system implanted in the Middle East by the Zionists. They're originally from a disbanded Khazar.
I got to stop you there because A,
Right.
it's chronologically beyond our topic and pretty
Okay.
much
Yes.
strict there. And two, Khazars don't exist. The Khazar thing is literally an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. They're a Turkic people that went extinct. Ashkenazim emerged along the Rhine River Valley in West Germany and migrated eastward. The Khazar thing is completely false. So no prime minister is Khazar.
Right.
None of them.
So the book that was written by a German Jew, his name is Kostler, he talks about the Khazars.
I know.
Okay,
And there's also
Palestine. Okay, excuse me, Dr. Liam. We said that we were not
also, the
discussing
Israeli
that.
Shlomo Sand writes about it, and they're both wrong.
Okay.
Other historians
Got it.
tore that shit apart.
Got
I mean,
it.
it's sort of like there are actual working scientists who deny anthropogenic climate change, but there are a tiny number of them. So, like, if 97% agree that something is bullshit, that's how empirical methods work. That's how peer review in the scientific method works. This is how we know the Khazar thesis is nonsense. Yes, there are a handful of scholars that have done it. We just know they're wrong.
Okay. So then,
And
David,
again, our topic is about Palestine, not anything
Palestinian.
else
I kinda know
anywhere
that.
else. So
Yes,
even if it was 100% fact somewhere else, it's not our topic, which is
get it.
not. I mean,
100%.
most scholars don't agree on it.
Okay, good to know. David Ben Gurion, his real name is David Groen, and he's from Poland. Also, Golda Meir, her real name is Golda Mabovich, and she's from
But again,
Kiev, Ukraine. That's
that
nothing.
kind
That
of
doesn't matter.
That kind of statement too, though, that verges on a racist attack. People change names. My birth name is Mar, not Omera. My family was forced to change its name at one point, and we adopted a random German name, and I reclaimed it at one point. I changed my name. So what you and Liam is short for William. So my birth name is William Marr. So you'd be telling me that I can't be Liam O'Mara, that I'm not my real name.
Okay.
I'm so sorry. Palestine Crown, do you have any question on topic, please?
Yeah, I do, about my history of my people. The Hyksos, are they Canaanite tribe that invaded Egypt, or are they a different tribe? Do they derive from the Canaanites?
They do likely have a Canaanite origin. So we did talk a little bit about them earlier. They are a Semitic population, and we know that there's constant movement back and forth between the Delta and Canaan, like constant interflows. So very likely it is connected to the Canaanites. At that point, it's harder to really say that they're the Canaanites the way we understand them, because the sense of identity and the political structures develop after the Egyptian period. But they're from the culture that became the Canaanites. They're from the region culture that became Canaanite, yes.
Right. I heard that they're from the Shasu tribe, which is a Canaanite tribe, but I wasn't quite 100% clear about that, or I guess that was my question. Okay, I guess those were my questions regarding the Zionists and the Canaanites, the Hyksos tribe. Thanks for answering.
Yeah, no worries. Oh, and somebody mentioned the Amorites. Yeah, it's important to understand the Amorites themselves also have a Levantine origin. So Amorites were originally part of the same cultural unit that became Canaanite. We don't call them Canaanites because they developed a distinct political identity that we can call Amorite. But they also originate in Palestine, in the Levant, and then, adopted a different identity and set in there. But if you're saying Amorites were Hyksos, you're still saying that they're Canaanites because the Amorites came from Palestine. That was their original origin. It's just that the political identities shift over time. We tend to think of the Amorites later in their Mesopotamian form, under like Hammurabi and crap like that. And then the territories later adopted a distinct Canaanite, political identity that doesn't include, Amorite as a thing. But it's from the same area and it's the same cultural continuum, the same Semitic populations that evolved into our Canaanite culture.
I have one comment about because you've said something about pro-Palis pulling some of the texts that are hateful or racist from the Talmud, and I have an understanding of that. Basically, I believe that pro-Palis, when they do this, they do it when they feel they're attacked or their Islam is attacked in the way Palestinians are attacked. So because Zionists are always like claiming that, or thinking that if you're pro-Palestine, then you're Muslim. Okay, therefore they start their attack on Islam and they pull up these hadiths and start saying, okay, look what Islam is saying. And that's when pro-Palis start thinking, oh, they need a defensive mechanism towards that and against that. So they go to these texts. And that's one of the main reasons why I don't accept the religious discussion about Palestine and who has a religious claim for the land in one sense. But also it differs because when you look at Judaism and Christianity, Judaism and Islam, Hadith is minor comparing to the Quran, while Talmud is major comparing to the Torah in terms of acceptance.
I miss something there, I think.
I mean, the Talmud, as I understand, has a higher acceptance among today's Jewish population or Jewish practitioners because it explains the Torah more. Now, in the Islam, Hadith is way less in value than Quran.
Not really, not historically, no. Talmud was accepted to varying degrees, particularly among like Mizrahi Jews. It was not present at all for some of them, so Ethiopian Jews didn't have access to it at all. There are many parts of the Jewish world that simply didn't have it. It is used in a lot of the most prominent Jews that we'll encounter. The people that you're interacting with, it's used by them. But where it has a high rate of acceptance, again, you have to understand, accepting that Talmud actually does contain wisdom from this period doesn't mean you take seriously most of the things that it says. Because again, it's a collection of conflicting arguments. So all you're doing is it's like there are Sahih Hadith that would still probably be completely false. It just means that the chain of transmission is accurate, but humans being fallible still fuck things up. So we can say this person legitimately said this, but that doesn't mean that it means this or that it goes back to Muhammad or as anything else. It's still, at the end of the day, collections of what people said, and we've always disagreed on how seriously to take different parts of it. So even among
that's exactly why I said Hadith has a lesser value than Quran for Muslim scholars,
and Talmud has less relevance to Jews than Torah.
Okay, guys.
I heard different opinions about that.
It's okay. We can discuss that on another another live.
It's not considered scripture by any Jew anywhere. It's literally not scripture.
Okay.
It never has been.
And okay, let's end it here.
Well, there was a quick point actually in talking
Yeah.
about the reason that people will use elements of Talmud that way. Understanding why people do something is fine. We had a conversation like this in my live yesterday. I can understand psychologically why people do this, but it's sort of like if somebody is racist to somebody because the other person was racist to them, it doesn't mean it's not fucked up. It's understandable. We can say, yes, this is understandable why this happened, but it doesn't make it okay to do so. And it's not helpful to moving forward.
100% agree. And that's why this is one of the main reasons why I don't like taking any Palestine versus Israel discussion, any religious path.
Yeah, when people take things like yeah, exactly. When you're applying a religious perspective, it implies the inability to take seriously the other's point of view. And what I'm trying to do in everything I do is to humanize everybody. When I wrote my course on Israel Palestine, I consciously structured it such that the first third of the class lays down the Jewish, Christian, and Muslim roots in the land to show why it's important to all of them. Jerusalem is literally the holiest site in the world to Christians. So it's important to all the faiths that develop there, and they all have roots that tie them to that land. And if we understand those, you can see why in the modern world, people pull from that and they construct their identities on it. And when somebody's identity is founded on an idea, it's very difficult to take seriously the other's perspective or to humanize them. And I want people to understand that people can, because of their own experiences, they have different views of the same material, the same events, the same location. They're going to feel differently about it in their own sense of self. And when we when we take one of those to the exclusion of all others, it makes it impossible to actually deal with other people as in a humane manner.
Okay, guys, I want to say thank you to each and every one of you, everyone who contributed into make this event as great as it is. Every tap, every gift was appreciated. I really appreciate each and every one of you. Professor Liam, thank you so much for your time, for your patience. And we are sorry that we starved you today.
But yeah.
Okay, that's good. So again, guys, in front of 170 people, I called dibs on Professor Liam's time. So whenever we need him, just DM me and he's going to be, he promised me that.
Oh, we're
Even though
we're gonna arm wrestle over him because we have a project, so we will mud
oh no,
wrestle
this
over
is,
him.
I'm not
I'm
saying
just
that
kidding.
I
I'm
have,
kidding. I'm playing.
I'm not, I don't have whatever the word. He's not I can't even say the word.
I know. I'm kidding.
Exclusivity on Dr. Liam, but I come first, and over other
You do.
project they come after that.
You're right.
What
I'll
about
give you
Noah?
first. You're right.
She comes first.
Do you want me to convince you more? Wait, give me 1 second. I'll be right back.
Night.
The
Guys,
cat.
No,
I
freedom
would like to
comes
thank
first.
everybody on the panel and everybody that's been here and supported us as usual. It was a pleasure today having everybody over here.
Can I, before everybody goes, can I do my spiel with the 2 codes?
Yeah, you can do. I think Freedom's got something.
Liam, if possible, I would like to exchange also a few conversations together in more private, because a lot of what could be spoken on public could annoy a lot of people. So
Come on,
Poor puppy.
say no to this.
What we're trying to do right now, and I'm still trying to sort through some issues. We're still struggling in terms of building up a community when I'm doing my little weekly lives there, and trying to get it so that the moderation works more effectively. Everyone gets to talk. People don't feel like, whatever. There's a lot going on there. But one of the things that's going to help with that process is building up the Discord community. Part of that's going to have a section for moderators to talk, but it's also, I want to have sections and rooms where everybody else can join that's interested. And when that's fully public, join the Discord. We can pick a time or day or whatever. We can pop into the audio section and just have our conversation and talk about whatever, because it's then not in the projecting it to the entire universe sort of format like this.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm fine doing that. Wherever something fits in, when I can schedule it in time wise, I'm fine.
I have I started literally using Discord. I didn't know anything about it prior to last week.
I used it extensively a few years ago, so it's nice to get back to, and I'm going to try and build a nice little community functional on there that's separate from this. I won't be able to spend as much time on it, of course, but whenever people schedule things with me, I'll pop in, I'll interact, I can answer questions fine. So yeah.
Cool.
Perfect. So no problem there at all.
No problem.
Yeah, let me just put that one more time, guys, for next week. Okay, so